Welcome back to AW360 Live at Advertising Week New York. I have with me David Bell, Professor of Marketing at Wharton School of Business. Welcome, how are you?
Hey, good BJ, nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, so I have to ask you, how did you get involved in Wharton?
In Wharton?
I turned it around.
Oh, you turned it around. So I came to the US as a student. I was a student out in California for a few years. Didn't realize that when you went down that path, they expected you to become a prof, and then just kind of fell into teaching. First at UCLA for a couple of years, and then most recently at Wharton.
Well, great. I'm interested in that. I teach as well, but
awesome.
not quite as a prestigious of a name there. So you were part of one of the more interesting topics that we've had so far this week. Cannabis crossover, the world's largest untapped consumer.
Right.
How did you get involved with Prohibited, which was a big part of this talk?
Sure. So initially it was really through personal friendship. So one of the three co-founders, Drake Sutton Shearer, like me, is a native of New Zealand, and we became friends about 5 years ago. Actually, ironically, while he was having a team of Wharton students in San Francisco work on his former company. So it was initially was a personal connection. Then I became somewhat interested in the media space and what he was trying to accomplish, and came in as an advisor and a small investor.
So tell us a little bit about this talk.
Yeah.
I know that there was a new video that was released.
Yeah.
So how are we bringing cannabis into Advertising Week?
Very good. So I think there's a couple of things that really the thesis there. One is that the consumer of cannabis is also the consumer of Tide and Bounty and Coca-Cola. Really, it's a pretty ubiquitous kind of consumer now, number one. Number two, we see from our research that this is also a consumer that's very, as you maybe might imagine, but is very engaged with content. Lifestyle content, food content, other content around there. So what Prohibited and what the team at AdWeek is really thinking about is, well, how do we use content to drive engagement with all these new brands that are coming out in the cannabis space that don't have access to traditional media and so on because of the various legislative issues that are around the space?
So, and that's a good question. What sort of legislative issues do they have? I know advertising with tobacco has changed completely.
Yes.
And now that we're seeing more legalized cannabis, what sort of restrictions do they have?
Well, I think again because it's a little bit murky, but if you and I had a cannabis brand like one of our speakers this morning, Defonse, Eric, he's doing cannabis chocolate, very beautifully designed, coming from his background at Apple. He can't really start going out on Instagram and advertising that product. So you have to be a little bit more non-traditional. So you see people doing pop-ups, telling stories, narratives, more of that rather than trying to run ads on Facebook or something, which of course you can't do.
That's interesting. I'm curious, is it just trying to reach the current consumers, or are we trying to change the awareness or change the image of the product?
I think it's really a two-sided thing. So I think it's really trying to help the people who are kind of the leaders in the space. I'll just sort of key off what we talked about this morning. One of the brands there is called True Humboldt, which is a collection of farmers out in Humboldt County. Really collective of people, very embedded, very involved in the community. What they're doing is trying to grow cannabis in a way that's sort of very ethical with respect to the environment, no pesticides, beyond organic and so on. And so how does a brand like that, kind of get its story out? Well, that's where a media company like Prohibited comes into play through producing docu-series and things like that. So on the one hand, it's really about building platforms for these new brands, and I guess on the other side of that are the consumers of the content, both informing them about the product category and also about the brand options that they have in different categories.
What sort of things are we looking at when they're, I guess, the hard thing is that the markets are only so many states that actually allow this.
Yes.
Are there any specific challenges for geographical challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, the thesis is probably eventually all the states will embrace this product, but for a variety of reasons, some historical, some to do with the current political climate and so forth, that might be relatively challenging. We kind of see the wave initially going from the west, places like California, Colorado, and I guess slowly merging east. You've got some pockets up in Massachusetts and so on. So that's definitely a challenge with developing a national footprint for a brand when really there's some grey legislative hurdles that you have to navigate.
Is there anything that some of the more traditional brands or even upcoming brands that don't have those hurdles Is there anything that they can learn from what you're doing with the cannabis?
Yeah, I think so, BJ. So a lot of what we're thinking about in this space actually is parallel to a lot of the new brands that millennial founders are coming up with. So brands here in New York City like Away for luggage, Dollar Shave Club for razors, Warby Parker for glasses. I mean, the founders of those companies have sort of built a new playbook on how do we reach consumers directly and how do we engage them with a narrative. And I think those two legs of the stool, they're also important for the cannabis brands too. How do I reach consumers directly and how do I build a narrative that's authentic and interesting that kind of resonates with my core customer group.
Is there anything about this project that gets you hyped up, that you're really excited about?
Yeah, very, very much so. So I think the first thing is that just as an area where there's a lot to learn and to be learned. I think there's a lot of maybe misnomer or misinformation about like who that consumer is, what the product is that he or she might be interested in. In certain ways, you kind of butt up against traditional pharmaceuticals when you're thinking about medical applications. So you have entrenched players that might want to sell you, synthetic drugs that are legal, and then you have someone else coming in who maybe in some sense has a more organic and a better product. Like my own father, for example, has a lot of trouble with sleeping. I'd actually rather that he ate some edible weed than he took whatever big pharma is kind of throwing him. So I think you've got a recreational use case, a medical use case, lots of different nuances to what this product is, what it can be used for and how it can benefit people. And I think most of that we're just sort of scratching the surface in terms of the knowledge base.
Great. Well, David Bell, thank you for joining us on AW360, teaching us a little bit about marketing some interesting products.
Okay, thanks a lot, BJ.
It's been
a pleasure. Cheers. Thank you.
We'll be back. AW360 at Advertising Week, New York.